Lifers, welcome back to the Live the Life podcast. As always, I am your host, Eric Aroca. On this episode of the Live the Life podcast, we have a special guest. So, on the podcast, we have none other than Brad Ball. Brad, welcome to the podcast.
Eric, pleasure to be here. Pleasure to see you again. We've been friends for a few years, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to come on here and participate in this.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. Believe me, it is my pleasure. When I started the podcast a few months ago, I can't believe I'm actually saying a few months ago now, but a few months ago, I had my list of people who I wanted to get on the podcast as guests, and you were definitely towards the top of that list. So thank you so much for making time. I know how busy you are. Let me introduce you a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your accolades because I find it fascinating. Brad is a business-to-business sales leader, international road warrior, and author of my favorite sales book, The Algebra of Sales and Persuasion. And you may not have heard about this book yet, but you will. And if you're in the sales arena, this is the best book I have ever read on sales. And that's coming from someone who's read a lot of books on sales. I mean, I got the shelf behind me is stacked with books on sales methodologies, sales whatever. This one is the only one that has tabs. So I love that book. All right. In addition to being an awesome author, Brad, I didn't know this. I mean, I knew you were an international road warrior, but I didn't know that you have spoken, that you have presented or sold in over 90 countries.
Yeah. I think it's probably 80 countries. I've been to over 90, mostly for business. And there's probably a handful there. I don't recall, giving a sales presentation when I was in, Costa Rica with my family. But your point's well taken. It's been, I've had a career that's taken me a lot of places internationally, and I've given sales presentations in every corner of the world.
Man, every time I see this, I think, man, I've traveled quite a bit for work. I've done over 10 countries, 80. Dude, that's crazy. Brad also has done 6- and 7-figure deals on every continent except Antarctica.
If you know somebody down in Antarctica who needs something, let me know. But yes, I've had the opportunity to, be in and work deals and close business in 6 different continents, and so that's something that's been interesting. Yeah.
That is amazing. You're like Jeep, right? Because they've sold cars on every continent. That's their grill. You know how they have the little slats on the grill?
Oh yeah.
7 for the 7 continents. So anyway, I find that interesting. It's 6- and 7-figure deals. Dude, we got to get you to Antarctica. We got to close this thing up, man. I mean, come on. That's the only one left. Brad is also the owner of a technology company called Global Sim, and that is they manufacture and sell bespoke training simulators throughout the world. I guess that's one of the reasons why you've been around for all over the world.
That's it. I started off as an employee and then became part of the ownership team. There's 3 owners, and we sell these. Most people think of simulators, they think of like a flight simulator, and ours are very similar. They're large, complicated, sophisticated machines, usually on a motion base. And we sell those all throughout the world, mostly to ports. That's kind of a segment of the market we focus on, mostly for port cranes, the type of container cranes you see in places like Houston or Los Angeles or Shanghai or Antwerp, Belgium, or all over the world. So that's what takes me a lot of different places.
That's awesome. That's good stuff. I love it. All right, let's see. Do you have a favorite sales movie?
Oh wow, I could jump into sales movies. I mean, everybody has a favorite sales movie, right? At least every sales guy or gal. And it's funny because the popular ones out there, I think, are the ones that are not good sales movies. I mean, there's the famous one, and I don't know that the movie's very famous. Glengarry Glen Ross came out in the 1990s, but there's a scene in there that's legendary that has Alec Baldwin, and he's not selling anything. He's kind of chastising everybody, and that's obviously a famous sales movie. That's not my favorite. My favorite is a more recent one. Maybe you've seen it. It's called Air. It has Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in it, and it's the story of Matt Damon is the sales guy, and it's the story of him working for Nike and going and getting the Michael Jordan account. I think that was just a fantastic sales movie and kind of a realistic one that shows a lot of the inner workings of a small or mid-sized company. And a lot of times you've got to sell an idea internally before you go out and make a deal happen. And I thought that movie was really good. And then, of course, he gets to meet Michael Jordan's mother, and there's various different sales presentations in there. And maybe my favorite part of that movie, Eric, is towards the end, they're doing this big presentation and Michael Jordan's in the room. And they start off with a video, and then the CEO comes in and starts talking, and the CEO almost ruins things. He kind of changes the pace of everything, and Matt Damon's character kind of has to get it back on track. And you know what? I don't know how many times that's happened to me. I've worked with some very talented CEOs and executives, but there's been a time or two where the narrative kind of goes off sideways. And you know what? It's up to you to kind of get the narrative, the dialogue back on track. And so anyway, that's a sales movie. If you've never seen that movie, it only came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, and it's called Air. And that's my favorite sales movie.
Yeah, that's a good one. I really, really enjoyed that movie. And I think you're right. I think it's out of the sales movies, or, that you could call sales movies, I guess. I think that one's probably the closest, or the one that I even resonated the most with, because I felt like it dealt more with reality and real situations that salespeople encounter, regardless, I think, of the industry that you kind of encounter. I remember going to Intermountain Healthcare there in Utah, the big, healthcare provider out there. They own a bunch of hospitals and things, and I had to close a new deal with them. The deal was worth $25 million over the span of maybe 5 years. And because my CEO interjected when he shouldn't have and wanted to take over the meeting and the negotiations, we ended up closing a $10 million deal. So,
which sounds big, but that could be a big opportunity missed. So
yeah. So like I said, that movie really resonates with me quite a bit. Excellent, awesome, that's a good one. All right, what's your favorite place you've been?
Oh my gosh, that's kind of a loaded question for anybody who loves travel. Well, I'll tell you a couple things. So, if you're talking physical beauty, there's a lot of beautiful places out there. Switzerland comes to mind. Iceland comes to mind. Maybe my favorite down in New Zealand, the Milford Sound, which is on the southern island of New Zealand, and it's an absolutely stunningly beautiful place. There's these massive waterfalls, and I mean, it feels just something out of a fairy tale. But listen, I think that, and I say it's a loaded question because when you travel, and anybody who's been a few places knows this, it's not just about the physical beauty. If we're talking a beautiful city, I would answer completely different. Of course, Paris is beautiful. Amsterdam, Buenos Aires, beautiful city. I think San Francisco is a beautiful city. But then you got to change that a little bit, and you've got to, what about the food, right? If we're talking food, I'm going to answer a little differently. I love Thailand for food. I think that's my favorite. And then Italy's great for food, right? But then, okay, what if we're talking people? Yeah, exactly. If you're talking people, a different answer again. of course, you go to France or a lot of places in Europe and even in the U.S., people can be a little more closed off or even sometimes a little rude. You go to the Philippines, oh my gosh, the people there are extremely friendly and warm. And that's probably my favorite place if we're talking about people. So again, a loaded question, depends on, what you're looking for. And, physical beauty, if you're looking for a good experience with the people, if you're looking for food, it depends.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, that's a long answer to a quick question, but
No, I feel like that's a great answer because I feel the same way. When I think about people as I've traveled abroad, I think China is my number one place when it comes to people because I found them to be so open and so generous and just so polite, very, very nice. That's my favorite when it comes to people. If I'm thinking about historical things, right? My stay in England was fantastic. I stayed in a little tiny town called Chester, which is right in the middle of between Manchester and Liverpool.
Okay.
And it's an old Roman garrison town. I mean, you couldn't go 10 steps without there being a historical marker.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I'm with you. And then food, I mean, I love South Korea and Greece. Those are probably my two favorite places when it comes to food. I would say probably Greece is my absolute favorite.
Oh yeah, you eat well in Greece. They've mastered the salad. There's no question about it, and a variety of other things. So yeah.
Fantastic. What's your most embarrassing moment in sales? Do you have one?
Well, yeah, I've got a few actually. I'll tell you what, it's kind of a funny story, and it actually happened in China, and this was over a decade ago. China-U.S. relations, as we are sitting here in 2025, are a little bit interesting right now. It's a tricky place to do business, but go back over a decade ago, and I've had some great experiences in China. However, I had one really embarrassing situation. And in fact, I talk about this in my book because what happened is I show up to this town, and this is not a normal place people go in China. It was a town called Qinhuangdao. And I say a town, there's like 1.5 million people that live there. But I show up there, and I thought I had an introductory sales meeting that I would introduce myself, shake a couple hands, give them a brochure. Now, I had an agent with me, my Chinese agent, who helped translate and whatnot. Well, we're driving to this meeting, and I see my name on a big marquee as we're approaching the building. And then I'm like, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm just showing up here and for a quick little meeting. And then as we pull into the main building, I get out, and there's my name again, big marquee, welcome Brad Ball. And all of a sudden, a group of about 30 people come out to greet me and shake my hand. The CEO is there shaking my hand. There's a couple photographers. And I mean, I felt like an ambassador. It was crazy. Well, I sit down, 10 minutes later, we all walk up to this big fancy boardroom. I sit down and start to give my presentation. And I realized very quickly that they were not expecting an introductory meeting. They were expecting much more detailed and comprehensive information from me. They had already done their research, and they were literally ready to buy right there. And yet I wasn't prepared. And that was partially a miscommunication from a colleague of mine. Nevertheless, it was an embarrassing situation where I'm trying to give very basic information. They're asking me detailed engineering questions that I look like the idiot American. And in my book, I talk about that experience because really what that is yes, it's a lesson on preparedness, but also it's a lesson in sales of understanding and knowing where your prospective client is in the buyer's journey. And they were much, much further along than I was. And that was a problem. And it created an embarrassing situation. Now, Eric, I got to tell you, usually the inverse is true. Usually as a salesperson, especially in B2B sales, we're further along than they are, and we want to introduce detailed information and specifications and talk about every product feature when the prospective client is not there. They need the basics. They need to build credibility and to build trust with you. So it was kind of an inverse situation, but very embarrassing, even with the language barrier there. It was truly an embarrassing situation, and we didn't win that deal. It really it scuttled that entire deal. And to this day, there's probably some folks who remember that American that showed up once who was clueless, and but it is what it is. It was a situation that happened, and certainly a learning situation. Sometimes the embarrassing moments are like that. So
yeah, definitely. And I know I've had my fair share, so you're not alone. Brad, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast was because, obviously we share some common, background, both of us with our sales experience. Now, mine was vastly different than yours. I've done a little bit of everything when it comes to selling. I even sold Saturn cars for a stint. And I found out that the old adage that says I could sell ice to an Eskimo is not true, right? You just can't. You can't sell everything to everybody. I found out that the hard way. I was pretty cocky, and I thought, oh man, I can sell anything. But I really enjoyed selling pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and even in the high tech sector in the early 2000s was a lot of fun. So I really appreciate your background, your experience. And one of the reasons I think why I love your book so much, and I'm not overstating this, I really believe that, I've read some decent sales books in the past. I'm not going to mention any of them just because, I don't want to.
Sure.
So I've read some decent sales books and some sales books that have actually, helped me in my sales career, right? Hey, I could incorporate this sales methodology, or I could, whatever. And I've had success with that. But the problem that I have is that when it's not coming from a salesperson, it's different. It's just rings differently. When you talk about your experiences, and we'll talk about micro stories, because it's one of my favorite things about the book. When you're talking about the importance of micro stories, it resonated with me because I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, yes, amen. I could go back into my experience, in my memories of when and how micro stories were, were so important in closing that deal or building that relationship that enabled you to get to the point where you could close the deal, right? Because early in my career, man, I just wanted to jump in and close the deal, right? I was like, let's go get this and let's make it happen, without doing the other part. The initial part is that building that trust and building that relationship so that that customer does buy from you, and doesn't just buy from you once. Because any team can win a Super Bowl, Brad, right? Any team can win the Super Bowl. That's been proven, except for maybe the Jets. They can't.
Well, the Cowboys are struggling too.
Yeah, but at least they've done it. At least
they've won it before. Yeah.
Right? And I feel it's the same way with salespeople. Anybody, if you get lucky enough, can close a giant deal, right? Whatever that giant deal means in your industry. In some industries, it's a $10,000 deal. In some industries, it's a 7-figure deal, right? So, but you can get lucky enough to close a big deal and get your name on a plaque, and everybody can celebrate you and stuff like that. But it's another thing to do it consistently and constantly, and having a plan where you do it over and over and over and over again. I think those are the salespeople where they're talking, I listen. And you're definitely fit that profile. So that's one of the reasons why I really just resonated with your book, why I love it so much, why I tell every salesperson I know today, if you have not read the Algebra, Sales, and Persuasion, you're missing out. Get yourself a copy. Go get it now, because I think it should be standard reading for anyone getting into sales and anyone who is in sales today. So Having said that, talk to me a little bit about micro stories.
Yeah, and let's get to micro stories. Let me just address something you brought up with, and this is one of the reasons I wrote the book to begin with. I mean, a lot of salespeople get into sales through various different methods. Sometimes they fall into it, or in some cases they're involved in a more transactional role. Selling cars or phone sales, and then they move into B2B. As like you, had a lot of sales experiences early in my career. At one point in time, I was selling shoes, and then I had briefly an experience for about 6 months where I sold timeshare, which was, and that's kind of a little bit of a, considered a little bit of a sleazy sales career, but I did it for a few months, and it was a good experience. I learned a few things.
Yeah.
But one thing that is interesting about sales education is I find that it generally falls into two different camps. Camp number one is more focused on transactional type of selling. And oftentimes when you are trained in that kind of thing, you're learning closing techniques, which sometimes are really cringy. They're outdated. They might work in a phone sales or maybe a retail type of environment, but things like the Columbo close or the puppy dog close are really not, they're outdated, many of them, and they're not great techniques in B2B sales. I would say they're not even good techniques in retail and transactional selling. I think there's a better method there. So that's kind of one camp. The other camp, and I experienced this also in my career because I went to college and then went to grad school and then went and got an executive certificate at a prestigious university. And so I saw the other side where you have professors and a lot of educators who know the stuff in theory and are very good at understanding and knowing frameworks, but what they lack on is the feet on the ground experience. And I have a lot of respect for those guys, but at the same time, they haven't been out there carrying a bag and trying to meet a quota, and so that education feels a little bit different as well. And I found that most sales books that I read, and there's some good ones out there. In fact, most of them have good bits and pieces, but I found that there was some components missing, and it was a story that I wanted to tell, and there were some frameworks there. One of them was taught in the world of debate and communication, but was not taught in sales. And another one aligned more with marketing disciplines that you might take a course in a marketing class in college, but again, not really taught in a sales education situation or platform. And so what I did is took a couple of those and merged them together and created a couple of unique frameworks that I think are certainly educating and helpful for virtually any sales discipline. And I've had a lot of good feedback on that specifically. And so that was what, of course, encouraged me to write the book. And I think that's what the book does. Now, you talked about micro stories. Let me jump in and get to that. Stories in general, everybody has a lot of people have read books about stories. Everybody has heard about how stories are important in sales. And 100%, you need to be able to tell a concise story. And there's a lot of people that have different methods of how to do this, but I think people overthink this. People think of stories and they think of, oh, you got to have this character, that character, and you've got to build it up. And in reality, in most sales situations, what you need to focus on is micro stories, stories that in some cases can be as short as 20 or 30 seconds long. But you need to have the ability to tell these effectively and communicate these, and if necessary, expand them out and be able to zoom in and zoom out depending upon the situation. And one example I give in the book, a quick story here, is a gentleman in Germany that I dealt with, and he a really bright guy, and he reaches out to me, and he has already created plans for a simulator. He'd already done some of the engineering, and he wanted my company to build this simulator for him. Now, we don't do that. We have our own simulator. We don't build a custom simulator for somebody like he wanted. That said, I decided to price it out for him anyway. And I go to his office a few weeks later in Germany, and I said, Thomas was his real name. I said, Thomas, here is the price for the simulator exactly as you want in your plans. And it is $3 million. And he, oh my gosh, Brad, that's way too much. And I said, good news, Thomas, I've got another simulator. It's the one we usually build, and it's only $700,000. And it does 90% of what you want to do. And so we started a new dialogue. We framed that differently. And of course, a few months later, we sell them a simulator. Okay, so that story there, I told that in about 1 minute. Now, I could have gone in, that's a micro story. It didn't take that long. You had a couple characters, you had Thomas and myself and a little story, right? Now, I could expand that out. I could take 10 minutes and tell you an in-depth, detailed version of that story. I could probably even shorten it up to about 30 seconds and just tell you the basic points. There's this guy named Thomas. He's from Germany. He had detailed plans. And guess what? We found out a solution for him. It was a lot less expensive than he wanted. I mean, there it is. There's a 10-second story. A big key in sales presentations is being able to shorten or lengthen your stories and be able to effectively communicate them. And so I call these micro stories, and I coach and teach people how to work this into your sales presentation. So that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, I love this. I love micro stories, and you did a great job of explaining it. You know, when I was in pharmaceutical sales, it dawned on me one day that I really needed to get good at telling that really quick story, that 30-second to 1 minute story. You know, as a pharmaceutical sales rep, you do a lot of standing around and a lot of waiting around, right? So you can do that in silence, or you can do what I would do, and that's sell to the entire office, right? So if I'm going into a doctor's office, well, the doctor's the only one writing a script. He's the only one that's going to, you know, write for that medication. But if I take the time while I'm waiting to sell to everyone else, hey, they're going to do some of that work for me when I'm gone, right? But micro stories became a big deal because doctors would come out and they would literally do this. They would just say, where do you want me to sign? And they were signing for the samples of the drugs. And so they would be like, where do you want me to sign? And I'd be like, I've been waiting for 45 minutes and this is what I get. Where do you want me to sign? You know? So I got super frustrated with that. And I thought, man, if I'm going to make it in pharmaceutical sales, something has to change. And it was the power of micro stories. So I could take a 30-second story while they were signing and turn that 30-second story into a 1 minute story or a 2 minute story. And if I could keep the doctor there for longer than a minute, hey, I had him. He was mine, right? I knew that I could come back the next day or my next visit, and I could share another story with him, another micro story, get his attention, and where he would be focused enough to listen to me and think, oh, okay, maybe this is why I should be, you know, reconsidering your product, right? And it changed not only did it change the way I did business, the way I sold, but it changed the end result, right? I didn't have to work as hard. I was working smarter, not harder. And the results were definitely there. So I love that you talked about micro stories, but that's a piece that you covered, because I feel like there's a lot of sales books that talk about the power of storytelling, but they don't tell you about micro stories. And let's face it, a lot of the time with our clients, we don't have 5 minutes. You don't have 10 minutes to sit and shoot the bull with them and tell them a story, unless you're maybe, you know, out to dinner with them or something like that. But micro stories, it's where it's at. I love it.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial thing. And too often salespeople, they want to go on talking about features. They want to talk about, you know, statistics, or they'll go off too long. And that's too long of a good thing is a problem in sales and in life, I think. And, you know, and Jerry Seinfeld had a legendary interview he did a number of years ago where he says, you know what? it's well known that Seinfeld kind of ended right when it was at its peak, in 1998, and he was on top of the world, and he ends the show, and everybody thought it's a little bit too early. Well, he goes on in this interview to say, hey, listen, you got to end at the right time. You go on too long, whether it's a whole series, whether it's a show, whether it's a stand-up, you're doing some stand-up, and you go on, it's perfect at 45 minutes, but you go on to an hour and it's too long. And it's the same with stories. A 30-second story might be just perfect, and going on too long can not work.
Feel it. Yeah, exactly. In chapter 5, you talk about building credibility. And I love this chapter. It's probably my favorite one. And you talked a little bit about authenticity. So how do you, Brad, build authenticity with your clients?
Well, I think it can depend on a variety of different factors there. But I mean, clearly listening is a big thing. But here's a big aspect to this. And I call it the original sin of selling. And that is, you can't be salesy. And the second you telegraph the fact that, you're salesy, or that you want a commission, you have commission breath, that's an enormous turn off, excuse me. And you've got to be able to, in any type of sales, even if it's in a retail environment. I gave a story in the book of early in my career when I was selling shoes as a teenager. We had this contest, and it was Christmas Eve. And if you know anything about retail, like Christmas Eve back in the 90s, before Amazon, before the internet, that was an incredibly busy day. And I worked at this shoe store in the mall. And the goal that day, I remember, was to sell $2,000 worth of shoes. That's per person. That gives you an idea of how many shoes you're selling. And it was a contest that day between me and a couple of my colleagues that I worked with there at the shoe store. And I got off to an early start. An old lady comes up and knocks on the gate before we'd even opened and says, hey, can I come in? I want to buy some shoes. And I thought, hey, this is my lucky start. I'm going to get off. And anytime an old lady comes into a athletic shoe store, she's just going to ask for a size 9 Air Jordans for her grandkid, and it's an easy sell. Well, I let this lady in, but instead of saying, hey, give me the size 9 Air Jordans, she wants to try on the Reebok Walkers, like the cheapest shoe in the store. And she spends 20 minutes trying on multiple different sizes. And I'm getting a little frustrated. And by now, the store's open. My colleagues, I was competing against a gal who was just a real sharp sales girl. And she'd already rung somebody up. And I'm falling behind here. And then somewhere along the way, I rolled my eyes and kind of asked her to hurry up or something like that. And it turns out she goes to my manager and requests a different salesperson. I'm sure I gave some teenage eye roll, right? Something like that. Well, she requests a different salesperson. She says, she was upset and that I was a bad salesperson. And you know what? She was right. I wasn't authentic. I kind of telegraphed that I wanted the commission, that I didn't care about her needs, that I was only looking for myself. So guess what? My sales manager turned her over to this gal, and that gal helped her out, and she bought the Reebok Walkers. And then she also asked for a size 9 Air Jordans for her grandkid. Even back then, those were over $100. And so turns out, my competition, my internal competition gets the deal. Well, here's the end of the story. End of the day, guess what? This gal, she breaks $2,000 and I was $100 shy. And so she got the big Christmas bonus, the big commission. I didn't. And again, just an authenticity. Don't act salesy. That's the original sin of selling, is acting salesy. And in any industry you're in, you want to avoid that. You've got to be sincere. You've got to be authentic. Don't telegraph any sort of commission breath. It's a bad way to do business.
Yeah. I totally agree, man. That's a tough way to learn that lesson, isn't it?
I learned it young, but yes.
I mean, even as a young man, that's tough. I love that you talked about authenticity. It's one of my favorite things when I speak, when I travel the country and do my keynote speaking. I talk a lot about authenticity. for some of the leadership talks that I have, keynotes. And that used to drive me nuts when people weren't authentic to the situation, even not even just to themselves, but to the situation. I remember seeing a lot of sales reps that would go in and be at a doctor's office, and they'd be talking to some nurse who's working, or at a hospital even. You got nurses who are working 16, 18-hour shifts, and these guys would walk in and talk to them about their vacation in Hawaii and they would leave and they think, oh man, I'm building this rapport. I'm building, I'm schmoozing all these people in the office. And it was always interesting to me, 100% of the time when they left and I followed them, it was always, I got the eye roll every single time.
Right.
Like, can you believe that guy? He has the audacity to sit here and tell me about, on and on about his vacation and where they're going on vacation next. And I'm here, pulling 18-hour shifts and changing bedpans,
Right. Just the tone deafness there. Yeah.
Tone deafness. But so that's what a lot of authenticity looked like, in that arena. We also talked about something that I rarely hear anyone talk about. And that's when you say the power of a sincere mea culpa.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think there's a time, I mean, in the world of sales, there's a lot of confidence, and confidence is key. And you talk a lot about that. And quite frankly, I think confidence boils over to sometimes arrogance, or you don't want to show any weakness, and in reality, vulnerability and sometimes a mea culpa, and I'm sorry, is a real important aspect to selling. It creates a connection. And this was a case that I gave an experience in the book of a situation where I had a customer that was, I guess offended was the right word. This is a former customer that I had dealt with when they had been upset about something that happened years earlier, and they were extremely upset about a warranty claim. Took me months and months to finally get a foothold here. And then I got an opportunity to present to the group. And they even admitted to me beforehand saying, Brad, you know what? We're glad you came, but based on our past, we think that you guys are probably, not who we're going to choose. They'd already kind of explained that I was an underdog in this deal, but they appreciated that I came. So I got up in front of this group of buyers at this large organization. And one of the first things I said is, you know what? I want to apologize on behalf of my company. Even though I personally wasn't there, the regime that was prior that dealt with you, they did you wrong. And we're prepared to make it right. And then we offered them kind of a special warranty thing. But that mea culpa, that sincere, I'm sorry, we screwed up. It was us, not you. That went a long ways with them. And they even informed me later, because they did. They ultimately chose us. And that took a while. It took many months, as oftentimes big B2B deals do. But they informed me later that was a fairly significant thing, that, we owned up to our mistake, even though it wasn't, my management team that did it. It was the prior one. That mea culpa really helped turn it around. So don't be afraid to be authentic, but also vulnerable, and, apologize when the time is right, when you make a mistake. And, that vulnerability can make a real difference.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you on that, building that connection, or building credibility. I have found that is the fastest way to build a connection or build credibility with the client. Yeah. When you mess up, just own it. And it may not have been your mess, right? You may have nothing to do with it, but it's your organization or your team or what have you. But if you just own up to it and just take ownership, man, it builds connections and credibility so much faster than I think anything else that you could do. It's worked wonders in my career in sales, and it continues to do that. As a speaker, when I first started out, I was not really willing to be vulnerable. That's scary. You're on stage and you're like, I don't know if I want to be vulnerable with all of you. So, but I learned quickly that the more vulnerable I was, the greater and the faster the connection I made with the audience. And it's definitely been true throughout my sales career. I remember double booking a surgery, right? And I had an implant, and I show up late for the second surgery because I double booked, and the doctor's moved on. He's like, dude, I used your competitor's product, you know? And he's like, I don't think you're allowed back in my OR because you stood me up, you know? And I put him in a bad position, and I just owned up to it. I'm just like, you know what? It is 100% on me. I didn't blame it on my phone. I didn't blame it on technology or nothing. I just like, you know what? It's on me. It's my fault, and I took it. And it took about a month. But a month goes by, I get a call, and now I've got all of his business. And I'm thinking, well, what happened? You know, because you're just like, I'm not even allowed in your OR. But come to find out, as we're talking over breakfast one day before another surgery case, he says, hey, the reason why you've got my business is because you owned up to your mistake. And I rarely meet sales reps who will own up to a mistake. Whether it's their mistake or their company's mistake, they rarely own up to it. So I think that's a great way to build credibility. I'm really glad that you touched on that. So good job. Well done. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about technology. Let's talk about AI in B2B sales. What does that look like? What do you think? What's your opinion on AI in B2B sales?
Well, I get excited. I think it's fascinating, but I think you've got to have some context here. And an analogy I like to give is early in my career in the mid 90s and in my college years, really, the internet, in fact, I remember the year, it was 1995. That was the year where, for the first time, big companies were starting to advertise their websites. You'd see a television commercial and you'd see, www.chevrolet.com or whatever. And sure enough, 95 was kind of the year where the internet, that's when Windows 95 was released and it kind of broke out. Now, I think the first thing I bought online was probably sometime around 1999, about 4 years later. And so there was this period in the early internet where it was exciting. Everybody was talking about it, but really the rubber hadn't met the road yet. And it was really 4 or 5 years later where, okay, now I trust Amazon or eBay or whatever, where I'm going to put my credit card in, and and of course nowadays everybody does banking, does trades their stocks, buys a lot of their stuff online, and the Amazon truck shows up. But I think AI is in a similar place to the late 90s, where it's been with us now 2 or 3 years. We've heard about it, maybe we've experienced it a little bit. But we really the rubber hasn't really met the road yet. We really don't know what and how it's going to change us. And I think it's going to be significant in a lot of industries, but I don't think we're there just yet. And if I'm being honest, I think B2B sales is an area that is a little bit more protected than others. I think that personal connection that you have to have with an end user, with a prospective client, especially in some industries where you're not so transactional, but you're dealing with big industries, big purchases that are hundreds of thousands or multi-million dollars. People want a handshake. People want to meet somebody in person. They want to see your product, to touch it, taste it, feel it, smell it, whatever. And so is there a place for AI? Absolutely. I use AI a lot of times to help me with consolidating emails, various different smaller tasks, kind of more on the marketing side of things, if I'm being honest. Nevertheless, I think that I think some of the core tenets to selling, the connection you make, the authenticity, those things are still very, very important. And I don't anticipate that AI is going to take over that aspect, that role. B2B sales in particular has. So
Interesting.
my two thoughts, and I could be wrong, Eric. I wouldn't be the first time, but I'm fascinated with the technology, though. It does some amazing things.
Yeah, I was a late adopter to the internet and to social media. I was deathly afraid. I did not have a Facebook account. I never had what was the MySpace? That was before?
Yeah, Facebook. That was a thing. Yeah.
I never had that. Like, that wasn't a thing for me. I wasn't interested. I was like, no, I'm not putting my stuff out there. I just didn't trust it. But I've learned over the years, as new technology has emerged, 5 years ago, I think, the population, greater population was introduced to AI about 5 years ago. It's been around for probably 30 or plus years. But 5 years ago, and something like ChatGPT or something like that, 3 years ago or something like that. But so it's been around a long time. But I've learned to be an early adopter, to just embrace it and figure out what role it plays in whatever it is you're doing. Whether you're in sales, you're a speaker, you're a teacher, you're a CEO of an organization, whatever it is. Figure out how can it benefit you, right? How can it benefit you and your business? Can it make you more efficient, more productive? So I'm interested to see where AI has that effect in B2B sales. And being that you guys are a bespoke company, right, for these simulators, is there a role that AI plays in that now? Or do you see a role that AI could play in building these simulators, somehow being integrated in that technology?
Well, yes. I mean, if we talk more the technology side of things, we've got a lot of software engineers that work at our company, and they're busy working on various different aspects to the software. It's a pretty sophisticated system here that we deal with, and they use aspects of AI all the time, particularly when they're coding. And I can tell you that a lot of the easier coding that's done, I mean, like anything, there's very complex, complicated work that has to be done, and there's some more mundane, easier work that has to be done that usually an entry-level type of software engineer or coder would do. That type of stuff is now being done much more on AI, and it's helping tremendously. And the payoffs are speed. The time to development, the time it takes to develop various different aspects of the software, much more fast than it was even 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. So we're seeing some of that aspect mostly on the software side of things. And then, of course, on my end, I talked a little bit about some of the marketing aspects. One thing I didn't mention is deep research. It's much more easy to do deep research now. It used to be, you'd have to Google and you got to sleuth around the internet. And now you can kind of get on the right trajectory doing some deep research through AI, which is very much appreciated and certainly something you need to do when you're researching various different companies or different aspects of an industry. So that's something we're seeing certainly more on the sales side as well. And there are other things as well. You can have AI assist in proposal making and things like that. But anyway, it's interesting. And, I try to be an early adopter on a lot of things. Sometimes I'm a little bit late, but I was that idiot who bought a DVD player for $400 back in 1999, and sometimes it doesn't pay off, but AI, having watched it closely over the last few years, is fascinating to see some, and you're getting more and more of these videos online that are AI, and these things come with challenges as well. Being able to detect whether something's real or not, but I think overall it's been a net positive, certainly in my career and with my company.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to keep tabs on that and just to see how it affects, things, and not only in sales and marketing, but even like you said on the technology side of it. Yeah. See how much more it changes in the next few years. It just feels like it's changing. The technology is changing hourly or even by the minute, not yearly. It's not an annual thing anymore. So
yeah, definitely.
Hey, Brad, when you're building a sales team, talk to us a little bit about what have you seen as successful sales culture or just organizational culture. What does that look like for you as a leader?
Well, I think you've got to have accountability. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to building a culture, right? And our particular sales team here is unique. We're on the road a lot. I can't hire somebody and find out in 90 days whether or not they're going to succeed or fail. I wouldn't consider that ethical. It takes a year and a half to sell some of these products that we're dealing with and some of these large machines. So when I make a hire, I go in knowing that it's going to be a couple of years. It's going to be a larger commitment, but ultimately it's accountability. And I think that's kind of true in most sales. Ultimately, it's the bottom line. Are you bringing deals in? And we have certain methods that we use. And I talk about some of those in the book, the get versus go and a few of the different techniques that we use to evaluate how does the pipeline look, and being able to dive deep and have some accountability. And it's a respectful accountability. It's not the Glengarry, Glen Ross, always be closing. It's a very different aspect than what you might see in the media, but it is an expectation that that the pipeline is being filled and that you're pursuing the right strategies to do that. A big part of being in a lot of sales careers is saying no, and saying no early. If there's a particular opportunity that is not a good fit, being able to recognize that early on and then not wasting the time, energy, effort, and resources to chase the wrong way, and being able to put your focus where it really matters. And ultimately, I would say it's accountability is the culture that we seek to create, and that my team hopefully adheres to.
Excellent. So fair to say then that if you hire people who hold themselves accountable, who believe in being accountable, that they're more than likely going to be successful in your organization, right? If they're following the right strategies, if they're filling the pipeline, but that kind of that core value of accountability helps them to be ultimately successful in your organization. Is that fair to say? There's
Yes,
a lot of involved in it, but that's a major player, right?
Right. And I think it's worth saying, and sales, like being a doctor or a lawyer, there's so many different disciplines. You can be a divorce lawyer, you can be a personal injury lawyer. You can also be a corporate lawyer, or I've got a good friend who's an IP lawyer, intellectual property, very different than a personal injury attorney, right? And likewise in sales, and you kind of mentioned earlier, whether you're selling cars or you're selling shoes, like I did early in my career, a different skill set. And I will say, when you deal with B2B sales, particularly on the high end, the expectations are different. I mean, you kind of need to come in, usually with a college degree, with some significant experience, and having some things on your resume and some success. We're not going to hire a rookie right out of the gate. We're looking for somebody, obviously, that is quite educated and has that experience and has done a lot of things. It's kind of more of a highbrow type of sales job at our organization. But within that, and I think it's transferable across the line, even to folks that are early in their career, accountability is a key aspect. And yes, if you're going to be successful, you've got to be accountable ultimately, and carry that bag and be able to show that you're doing the hard work, you're putting in the time, and you can ultimately have success in closing business. And so, yes.
I love it. Hey, have you ever been a part of either as an interviewee or an interviewer about, hey, sell me a pen? Like in the interview process. What do you think about that idea of sell me a pen when you're in an interview?
I like it. Of course, it's not the be all end all. I've both had that question asked to me, and I've even asked that question in interviews. I think it's interesting. You're looking obviously for how somebody handles a question like that, and obviously in that particular case, you're looking for somebody who's not just going to sell the features, that they're going to dig a little bit more. And so, but yeah, it's kind of a fun one, I guess. So
yeah. It's been interesting to me, and I think it's been fun depending on who has asked or what organization I've been with in an interview that's asked it. Early in my career, I was asked that. I don't think it went well. It was a technology company, and then I was asked again in a pharmaceutical setting, and it went really well. Like, it was just, the vibe was different. The room was different. So I've always found that question to be really interesting. It's like, what are you really looking for? You know, because different people are looking for different things. So it's always been an interesting question. Just wanted to find out if you've ever been a part of that at all.
Sure.
So Brad, we're up against this. So man, this was awesome. Great conversation. Really enjoy. I could talk to you about sales forever, brother. I never.
That was a quick hour. It's been about an hour now. So.
Right?
Time flies when you're having fun. So.
Do you have any other projects in the works? Any other books or any other projects in that regard coming out?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, I wrote my book last year. I have a hobby. I love producing content on YouTube, and so I've got a couple different channels there. One focuses more on travel stuff, and my family's featured in some of those videos. But I've got another one which is which I do more sales and business type of stories. And so that, that's kind of been probably will be a focus here over the next few months to next year. Hobby, and of course, having a little bit of fun with it. So that's a lot of fun. So.
All right, we'll keep our eyes out for that one. Brad does a great job, everybody, on LinkedIn. So if you want to follow someone on LinkedIn that just puts out really good content, definitely give him a follow. Your information, Brad, I'll put it in the description, as well as the link for the book, so all of you can go and get a copy of the Sales Algebra. You definitely want to get it, or the Algebra of Sales, excuse me. And so yeah, that'll be great. We'll definitely put all those links on there so people can find you and continue learning from you, because I know I do. So I really like your perspective that you give. Before I let you go, give us your number one travel tip.
Oh, there's a lot. I could go down a rabbit hole there, but here's one. I'll just take a minute. Be flexible with your hotels. A lot of people get in the mindset specifically with, they're loyal to an airline. And with airlines, you kind of got to be, depending on your hometown. But with hotels, I actually am a free agent when it comes to hotels. I'm not somebody who, I used to be a hotel, Hilton Honors, and then I was with IHG. But over the last decade, I have found that if I am a free agent with hotels and maybe book through a hotels.com or even through my credit card like Capital One, having that flexibility and being able to stay anywhere you want in a town is a game changer. And I went to Barcelona once over a decade ago with my wife, and we had Hilton Honors points, and there's like 3 Hiltons in town. And we ended up staying in one of them, and it was okay. It was an all right trip. But Barcelona, we thought, was just okay. I went back a few years ago, and with the hotel flexibility, I didn't have to stay in a Hilton. And I picked a hotel, a little boutique hotel, right next to the Sagrada Familia in just this lovely neighborhood. And my whole perspective of Barcelona changed. It's one of my favorite cities. And a lot of that is where you stay, what hotel you pick. So I tell people my one travel tip is be flexible with your hotels, and don't feel like you need to be 100% loyal. Find a hotel that's in the best part of town. Your experience will be entirely different.
Never thought of that, because really the hotel is your home.
Sure. That's
your home for as long as you're there. So that totally makes sense. I will definitely add that in to what I do, because I've been a Marriott guy for years and years and years, and I haven't always enjoyed my stay. I'll be honest. depending on where I've been. And so I will definitely use that. Thanks for the tip. That's great. Great. Good tip.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. That is the end of this episode. But like I said, give Brad a follow. Check him out on LinkedIn. Definitely get his book. Everything, all the information's in the description. And I hope that you guys, I hope that Brad's message resonated with you, because he talked about values without ever using the word value, right? We talked about authenticity. We talked about building credibility. And that is a great way for you to move forward and continue to live the life.
Eric, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to be on here, and look forward to chatting with you again in person sometime.
Yeah, man, we'll make it happen for sure.